Welcome to the third dimension. As the war in Yemen entered its 10th year, the cultural and artistic landscape has undergone devastating changes. Many artists have been forced to leave the country, while the rest continues to face enormous challenges. Meanwhile, artists who have the experience of living in a land where they find themselves different from the majority suffer identity crisis and consider their rootless existence as kind of exile. Such kinds of fragmented existences are common in diasporic works. Yet, what is striking is that such existences have endowed those artists with dynamism, fluidity and rare creativity. This literally applies to my guest today, Amina Atiq. Amina is a Yemeni British poet and performance artist who has used the spoken word to reflect the times, depict grim realities of war, and explore displacement and migration in the United Kingdom. Amina, welcome to the program.
Hello. No, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Now, if we start from the beginning, Amina, you migrated from Yemen to the United Kingdom when you were just 4. The question is, how did you navigate your complex relationship to the homeland and the tensions of growing up in diaspora?
Interesting question. Thank you. I think there's 2 parts to this question, because you don't realize these are complex relationships until you grow up, because as a child you only learn to play the streets and you think everything is how it should be and everything is in its place. But when I grew up older, I realized some things were complex and there was a lot of tension between relationships, between identity, between even self-love, how you perceived yourself. This idea of, as you know, growing up in the UK, we do have far-right agendas and racism and Islamophobia. So you learn to protect yourself, and then you learn to know what is right and wrong. But I think, and this is the beautiful part of complex relationships, is that my family, and something that I see very, very common in many Yemeni diaspora communities across Europe, they allow their children to grow up in Yemen. And what I mean by that is that even after I would go home from school and I would have a whole day of English, I would go home and I could smell Yemeni food. We're speaking in Arabic. The TV is on, and Yemen TV is on. So we were able to experience Yemen in many different forms. When we have weddings, we do certain traditions that even people in Yemen have forgotten. And I think it's because when you are in distance, you try to hold on to tradition a little bit harder than people that already have it so close to that. And I've been very fortunate enough that my parents allowed us to see Yemen in many different ways, whether that was just simply by our food.
If I interrupt, which part of Yemen specifically?
Yeah, so I'm from Rada, and specifically in Malah.
Yeah.
So Al-Bayda.
Yeah.
But it's something that I really do tend to see. However, looking back, in any part of the diaspora, sometimes you're not told or you're not given permission that all identities are acceptable to come together.
Yeah.
Because my identity, as well as being Yemeni, I'm also British. I have played a valuable position in this society, because not only We live here, we exist here, we pass with other people, we integrate, and I don't like saying these things because as if we have to be grateful.
Yeah.
And we've been brought up with this idea because we should be grateful that we're here. Therefore, we have to sacrifice our Yemeni identity.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize when they're looking from Yemen to here that being Muslim and Arab in this country, as well as it being a very safe place to live, we have faced a lot of systematic racism and Islamophobia.
Yeah.
And that has definitely impacted how we move in our society. Yemeni people like to stick together.
Yeah.
And I understand why. It comes from a place of fear.
Yeah.
So I feel like the tension has also come from this idea that we've been restricted from actually experiencing the fulfillment of life because we're constantly thinking of being the good immigrant.
Yeah.
Like we can't mess up. You don't, because if you mess up, you are a bad Muslim, you are a bad Arab, you don't deserve to live here. So there's a lot going on, and that's why in a lot of primary schools and secondary schools in the UK, most of the Arab diaspora are high achieving than their white peers, which is great. But that pressure.
Yeah. So you talked about identity crisis, Islamophobia, and all these interesting things. This brings me to one important incident in your life, Amina, and you recall that what we call the London-Liverpool train station incident. Would you please talk more about it? Yeah,
I mean, there's been many situations, but with this situation that happened, I somehow recorded the incident, and when you have things that are evidence and they are digital, you can upload them. And what happened was it went viral on Twitter.
Yeah, you were in the train,
Yeah, so what happened on the incident was it was a very busy train, and it was a football day. And as everyone knows, football in the UK is celebrated, and I didn't get a seat at the train. My seat had been taken by someone else, and I could see that people were drinking, and it was. So I said I didn't want to go and confront them about my seat, so I left it. So I actually stood up throughout the whole journey for 2 hours and 20 minutes. But in that incident, there was another two men standing, and they seemed as if they were travelling back from London. From work. And what had happened is we were talking about political conversation. The lovely thing about Liverpool is that people are very politically aware. So you will always have a political discussion with someone from Liverpool. But unfortunately, racism still does exist within, even if you're having dialogue and it seems friendly, sometimes people don't like who you are. And in that moment, what had happened is my mum called me. And as soon as I spoke in Arabic, they didn't like it. But when I was speaking to them in English and an accent, it's as if they've accepted me. But as soon as they heard my Arabic language, as soon as I put the phone down, the guy, he says to me, in Spain, when I go to Spain, I speak the local language. And I'm not naive. I know what he's trying to initiate, like as if speak your local language, don't speak Arabic. And in that incident, I challenged it, but with challenge comes fear. So I was really scared. And in that moment, I started to record the incident. But there has been many incidents like this one and worse.
And I believe you wrote even a poem on that incident, Amina, Shaman? Was it on that incident?
I wrote a poem, but I think it was not about just my situation. I think it's more about just such a, because as a poet,
Yeah.
we don't just talk about our experiences to indulge in them. We write about our experiences as a self-reflection, but also to educate.
Yeah.
And I definitely wrote that poem to educate, that, as the metaphor of the train moving.
Yeah.
These things can happen where your life is questioned, where your identity is questioned. And really, you're just going home. And within 2 hours, your whole identity is crushed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay, so that brings us also to the conversation about poetry, and perhaps I will. T.S. Eliot says, Amina, that the purpose of literature is to turn blood into ink. So, based on that, when did Amina start to turn blood into printed words? Yeah.
Yeah, it does definitely sometimes feel like blood. So I started very, very young. My first printed poetry was probably 16 or 17. I still have the collection. So I was published part of an organisation called Writing on the Wall.
Yeah.
And they had a young writers group who are actually based across the road from here.
Yes.
So it's interesting how life, now I work in the same area.
Yeah.
15 years later. Well, yeah, so that's when I got published. However, seeing words on print is just a moment.
Yeah.
Because from that first poem I ever wrote, I know that has developed to a very different poem than what I have now. And this is why people get scared to print their poetry, because they're like, when is it finished?
Yeah.
Poetry or any form of literature is never finished. It is never finished.
Yeah.
And I love the organic growth that I've had in my career.
I see.
Because I started at a very young age. I'm able to really look at this journey through my print poetry and how certain words never leave your tongue.
I see.
And there are certain words that I still repeat till today. Like, I like the word dance a lot. I don't know why I use it. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But in a lot of my poems, I write about dancing. And I'm not talking about dancing as an actual art form. I'm talking as if it's a feeling.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to look at that and understand your journey and things that you do the same, but also things that you don't do.
Yeah.
For example, one of my old poems, I wrote that I carried my home on my back.
Yeah.
And that is incorrect, because in my immigration journey, my journey was, I came on because my father was born in the UK.
Yeah.
But my mother came on a marriage visa, a spouse visa. So we didn't come from a place of displacement or war, we came through a spouse visa. So it was a very, getting on a plane and taking another plane and arriving to the UK. And when I realized, I looked back at that, I felt like I was fabricating a story that didn't belong to me.
I see.
And that's because when you grow up in the UK and you're told that you are an immigrant, a refugee, and people that look like you are only this, and that you can't be educated and you can't be intelligent, poetry it's like a sponge. You absorb that energy. And I realized at a very young age, I was writing from that perspective of as if my value is so little, and that this identity crisis was that as if I am here in this place that is not mine.
I see.
However, I am 28 now, and I have a right to be in this environment.
Yeah.
And that comes from 10 years of writing about home for so long.
Talking always about poetry, Amina, okay? If I may ask now, have you been influenced by English poets, Arab poets, okay?
Oh, yeah. Obviously, when you grow up in the UK, you read a lot of English poets, especially male war poets. So, you were exposed to the, World War One and World War Two male war poets on the trenches, and writing poetry while they were at war. And I found that always interesting.
Yeah.
However,
Arab poets?
Arab poets, I'll tell you the story that I never forget it because it was a moment of acceptance.
Yeah.
I went to an event with the Liverpool Arab Arts Festival. So it's a festival that promotes Arabic culture. And this is why it's important that we have these spaces, because then people of the diaspora can access art that speaks to them and is represented to them. And they brought a professor from California, Dr. Sam. And he works as a translator for translating the poet Muhammad Mahmoud al-Zubairi.
Yes.
And I've heard of al-Zubairi, but because I've always seen his poetry in Arabic, unfortunately I don't read Arabic very well.
Yeah.
So I never was able to access it. And when he showed us the translation in the event, because al-Zubairi is not just a poet, he was an activist in his poetry. And I grew up with activism at the root cause of my work, and when I heard his poetry about home, diaspora, activism, I felt a moment of acceptance. I felt as if I was seen, Yeah. And because, I did go to university and I studied creative writing and I had a poetry modular, but no one really understood what I was writing. They always misunderstood, as if I didn't make sense. And it really troubled me because obviously as a writer, you already have imposter syndrome. You're not good enough, you need to try harder. But when I saw Zubairi's work, that gave me so much confidence and so much motivation, because his words are, they hit even harder because of the conflict in Yemen.
Yeah.
And I realized this poem is still alive today.
Yes, true.
And this is why poetry and any form of literature is so important, because it has a soul. Yes. And it still lives even centuries later.
Yeah.
And I just wish that young people in this generation don't overlook the power of literature and are able to write and express themselves.
Yeah.
Because one day someone will look at your work in 100 years.
Yeah.
And this still speaks to me.
I see. Okay. If I may bring you back now to Yemen and Yemen plight, okay, literature in the times of war. I believe that you participated in special discussions in the British Parliament about Yemen's tragedy. Okay. Would you tell us more about this experience?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, activism was also parallel to me writing poetry. So I would attend rallies and protests and also write poetry. So they worked hand in hand. So from a very young age, I was politically aware and very politically involved. And when the war started, a group of Yemeni people in Liverpool and different parts of the UK, Birmingham, Sheffield, we basically joined the Labour Party as a subgroup called Liverpool Friends of Yemen. And then you also had like Sheffield Friends of Yemen, Birmingham. And what would happen is in our cities, we would meet and we would politically discuss like things that we want to challenge, things that we want to happen, things that we want to change within our government, so that we can ease the pain of the Yemeni people.
Yeah.
And we took many visits to Parliament, where we had like discussions with other members of Parliament, people who had power to make these changes and to listen to us. And yeah, and you know, some of us, I personally was interested in how we are protecting Yemeni youth in terms of getting their education. As you know, during the war, many of them who were on scholarships or were abroad had to come back to Yemen, or some of them couldn't afford to continue with their studies. So I was more interested in if we're going to think about rebuilding Yemen and the idea of peacemaking, we really need to think about how education is rooted in this.
Yeah.
And especially young men. As you know, within Western media, it portrays Yemeni men as if they are the terrorists, the ones who want to just fight, or
Yeah.
and really, what about the young men who just want to be educated? What about the young men who want to be artists and writers and poets? Where are they? There was a lot of discussion about many things. There was even discussion about members of parliament going to Yemen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But, you know, it was great. It was a great development to understand the importance of policy making and governance.
Yeah.
And as you know, the British government, they made a lot of profit from selling arms. And we were challenging what that relationship is. If you are profiting from war on the name of Yemen, then we had to challenge that, especially because Britain is the pen holder of Yemen.
Yeah.
And as you know, Britain
Yes.
also occupied Yemen. So we were trying to challenge the British society, like, you had a role in this and you still have a role today.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
Yes.
also I performed poetry many times in Parliament, and that was very interesting because, as you know, in Parliament it's a very academic political space.
True.
So when they asked me to perform poetry, you know, and someone said this to me,
Yeah.
they said that when you hear poetry in these spaces,
Yeah.
it's as if you brought soul back into this space. Because what happens in political discussion, we will say 100,000 people have died in Yemen.
Yeah.
But the human mind cannot imagine 100,000 people dead.
Nice.
You can't. But what does poetry do?
Yeah.
It dignifies human life. We don't talk about 100,000 people dead. We talk about, you know, a child that was killed on the bus going from home to school. And we talk about the imagery and dignify his human life as if he is a human being, not just a number.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was an interesting experience to have.
Okay. Now, if we just move to the projects that you have participated in, but very briefly, Amina, you wrote or the project of Broken Biscuits, also the third place and the poet gift. Would you just pick one of these projects to elaborate in just in less than a minute, perhaps?
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, 1, 2.
Yeah, all these projects are about, yeah.
Okay, so Broken Biscuits was a project that I wanted to do regarding looking at my grandparents' journey from Yemen
Yeah.
to the UK in 1960s. So a very long time ago. So I wrote a play and I also interviewed my grandma. The Third House was a project that I did. It was an extension of Broken Biscuits because for so long I was looking at my own family heritage, but I wanted to expand it to other Yemeni people.
Yeah.
And when I was in Egypt, in Cairo, it was COVID, so I was stuck in Yemen.
I see.
But you can make art everywhere, right? No matter where you are in the world. And I was there for 3 months and I was like, I need to make art.
Yeah, art is universal, yeah.
Yeah, so I contacted my organization that I'm working for and I said, hey, I know I have some funding. Can I do some work here? They were like, of course, just do it digital so we can access it.
Yeah.
So I was interested in gathering Yemeni artists in Cairo and to understand more about their work.
Yeah.
So we did a whole day of like an exchange of art and skill sharing on the theme of diaspora. And I learned so much because I realized when you create art without restrictions, there's an element of freedom in it that in the way you create. But when you're faced war and you're exiled and then you're restricted in what you can talk about, it does impact your expression. So I definitely learned a lot from that.
So Amina, if you would like to wrap up this conversation, in the terms of Edgar Allan Poe, who says, to elevate the soul, poetry is necessary. Would you just conclude this interview with reading just 2 stanzas, one of your favorite poems, preferably about Yemen or,
Of course. I have a few, but I think this one will end the show in a more heartfelt way. So this is a poem called My Mother Danced With My Hair. And it is about when you're living in the diaspora, how you and your mother, your Yemeni mother and the daughter, kind of have a conversation with the hair, okay? But it's very political as well within the language. When my mother danced with my hair, I'm cross-legged on the kitchen floor between my mother's thighs. And my mother crunches my hair in her hands, reminiscing the terrace dance in her ankle bells and clicking her fingers to the music her tongue cracks. My mother chokes up her childlike laughter, drenched in olive oil, and I felt my neck snap. She spreads the excess across my pigmented neck, and we dance together. We dance together with my hair in her hands, but I turned my face away. I said, Mama, I don't want to be here. But my thighs thickened on the flinty floor, too tangled to sit up straight for a primary school girl. But didn't Mother tell you that she loves you? Perfectly plaiting my hair, she licked her finger, stealing my childhood with her nails creased into my roots. To keep me away from the foreign winter, because only fair girls seek marriage who keep their face moist. But I'm too young to be smothered in love, and we both knew it was never going to last. So my mother tells me, finish your breakfast. And I bit into my half-buttered toast like a dry date, skimming its skin. I plotted my journey back home with loose change ringing in my skirt pocket. But I promised my mother that I will walk up the diaspora walls when they come knocking. And when they come knocking, my mother found me separated from my hair. I told my mother, it reminded me too much of the girls back home. So she turns her face away. I don't want to be here.
Oh, perfect, Amina. With that poem, we come to the end of this interview, Amina. Thank you so much for talking to Yemen Today TV, and thank you for your time and insights.
No, thank you so much for having me, and I really hope that this discussion inspires and challenges discussions for the future.
Thank you. That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.